Elena had been standing on her feet for 14 hours straight when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She was in the middle of changing in 4 bag for a patient in room 312 and almost ignored it, but something made her check the screen between tasks. It was a message from the nursing agency she had registered with 2 years ago. They had never called her before. The message was simple. They needed a private nurse for a wealthy client. The pay was 3 times what she made at the hospital. Elena read that number twice because she thought her tired eyes were playing tricks on her. 3 times her salary. That kind of money could change everything. She called them back during her 15-minute break and listened carefully to the details. The patient was a 68-year-old man recovering from a stroke. He lived alone in a mansion on the wealthy side of the city. The job required her to be available 6 days a week. She would have her own room in the house. The agency warned her that this client was difficult. 7 nurses had already quit in the past 4 months. Some lasted only a few days. One walked out after just 6 hours. Elena asked why they kept leaving. The woman on the phone paused for a moment before answering. She said the man was demanding and cold. He had a reputation for being impossible to please. Most nurses found him unbearable. Elena thought about her mother lying in a hospital bed across town. Medical bills were piling up like a mountain she could never climb. Every month she fell further behind. Every month the collectors called more often. She told the agency she would take the job. 2 days later, Elena stood outside the biggest house she had ever seen in her life. It was not just a house. It was an estate. Iron gates stretched across the entrance like the mouth of some sleeping giant. Beyond them, a long driveway curved through perfectly trimmed gardens. The mansion itself looked like something from a movie. White columns rose up toward the sky. Tall windows reflected the afternoon. Elena felt small standing there with her worn suitcase and her second-hand coat. A security guard checked her name and opened the gates. She walked up that long driveway feeling like she was entering another world. A world where people never worried about paying rent. A world where electricity never got shut off. A world completely different from the cramped apartment where she had grown up. The front door opened before she could knock. A woman in a gray uniform greeted her. She introduced herself as the housekeeper and led Elena inside. The entrance hall alone was bigger than Elena's entire apartment. Marble floors stretched out in every direction. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, catching the light and scattering it like diamonds. Elena tried not to stare, but it was impossible. Everything was so beautiful and so cold at the same time. The housekeeper explained the rules as they walked. Mr. Harrington preferred silence. He did not like small talk. He expected his meals at exact times. He had specific preferences for everything. Elena listened and nodded and tried to remember it all. They climbed a wide staircase to the 2nd floor. The housekeeper stopped outside a set of double doors. She lowered her voice and told Elena one more thing. Mr. Harrington had lost his daughter 5 years ago. He had never been the same since. Elena should not mention the daughter. She should not ask questions about family. She should not touch anything in the room that did not relate to her nursing duties. Elena promised. She understood. The housekeeper opened the doors and Elena stepped inside. The room was enormous with high ceilings and tall windows draped in heavy curtains. Medical equipment stood near a large bed where an old man lay propped up against pillows. His hair was white and thin. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp. They fixed on Elena the moment she entered and did not look away. This was Victor Harrington. Elena had heard his name before. Everyone in the city knew who was. He had built his fortune in real estate and banking. He owned half the buildings downtown. His name was on hospitals and libraries and university halls, but none of that mattered. Nowhere in this room. He was just an old man recovering from a stroke. His left side was weak. His speech was slightly slurred. He needed help with basic tasks. Elena introduced herself in a calm, professional voice. She explained that she would be taking care of him from now on. Victor said nothing. He just watched her with those Sharp eyes. Elena felt like he was looking straight through her, like he could see every secret she had ever kept. She pushed that feeling aside and got to work. The first few days were hard. Victor barely spoke except to give orders. He wanted his water at a certain temperature. He wanted his pillows arranged a specific way. He complained about everything. The food was wrong, the room was too bright. Elena moved too loudly. Nothing she did was good enough. Other nurses might have quit. Elena had seen how the agency described this job. Difficult client, they called it. That was an understatement. But Elena was not like the other nurses. She had grown up with nothing. She had worked her way through nursing school while caring for her sick mother. She had survived things that would break most people. A grumpy old man was not going to chase her away. She stayed calm no matter how harsh Victor became. She followed his instructions without complaint. She adjusted and adapted and kept her mouth shut. After the first week, something strange happened. Victor started watching her differently at first. Elena thought she was imagining it, but no. He was definitely observing her. His eyes followed her around the room. He studied her hands when she prepared his medication. Noticed small things about the way she moved. One evening, Elena was sitting beside his bed, reading through his medical charts. Her fingers were tapping lightly on the wooden table beside her. She did not even realize she was doing it. It was an old habit. Her fingers moved in patterns, rhythms, like she was pressing invisible keys. Victor cleared his throat and asked what she was doing. Elena looked up confused. She did not understand the question. Victor pointed at her hand. Her fingers had been moving in a specific sequence. She looked down and felt her cheeks grow warm. She apologized and said it was nothing, just a habit. Victor did not look convinced, but he let it go. That night, Elena lay in her small room at the end of the hallway. She stared at the ceiling and thought about her fingers. She knew exactly what that habit was. It was the ghost of a life she had left behind. Once upon a time, those fingers had danced across piano keys. Once upon a time, music had been her entire world. But that was years ago. Before everything fell apart, before she had to choose between her dreams and her mother. She had made her choice, and she did not regret it. But sometimes late at night, her body remembered what her mind tried to forget. The next morning, Elena went back to work. As usual, she helped Victor with his exercises. She monitored his blood pressure and heart rate. She made sure he took his medication on time. Everything was normal until she noticed something in the corner of the room. It was covered with a white cloth. She had seen it on her first day, but assumed it was furniture. Now the cloth had slipped slightly. Elena could see dark polished wood underneath. She recognized that shape immediately. Her heart beat faster. It was a piano, a grand piano hidden under a dusty cover. She tried not to look at it. She tried to focus on her work, but her eyes kept drifting back to that corner. Victor noticed, of course. He noticed everything. He asked if she was curious about it. Elena shook her head quickly. She said she was just doing her job. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke in a voice that was softer than usual. He said the piano belonged to his daughter. Her name was Sophia. She used to play it every single day. The whole house would fill with music, but she died 5 years ago, a car accident. She was only 26 years old. Since that day, no one had touched the piano. No one was allowed to go near it. It just sat there under that cloth, gathering dust. Elena felt a deep sadness wash over her. She did not know what to say. She simply nodded and continued her work in silence. But something had shifted between them. A crack had appeared in the wall. Victor had built around himself, and without knowing it, Elena had taken her first step into the broken world of Victor Harrington. Weeks went by, and Elena got used to life inside the Harrington mansion. She learned the rhythm of the house. She knew which floorboards creaked and which doors stuck. She knew what time the gardeners arrived and when the kitchen staff left for the night. She knew how Victor liked his tea and which side of the bed he preferred to sit on. The old man was getting stronger every day. His doctors came twice a week and marveled at his recovery. They said his blood pressure was stable. They said his mobility was improving faster than expected. They credited the consistent care he was receiving, but Victor never once acknowledged Elena's hard work. Treated her like she was invisible most of the time. When he did speak to her, it was usually to complain or give orders. Elena accepted this without bitterness. She had dealt with difficult patients before. Some people express their pain through anger. Some people push others away because they are afraid to let anyone close. Victor was clearly one of those people, but Elena noticed something strange happening. The old man had started watching her in a way that made her uncomfortable. Not in a creepy way, more like he was trying to figure something out. His eyes followed her hands whenever she worked. He observed the way she organized his medication bottles, stared when she wrote notes in his medical chart. At first, Elena thought she was imagining things. Maybe he was just bored. Maybe he had nothing better to do than watch his nurse work, but the feeling grew stronger with each passing day. One Tuesday afternoon, Elena was sitting by the window reviewing Victor's exercise schedule. The sun was warm on her face, and she felt almost relaxed. Her mind drifted, and her fingers began moving on the armrest of her chair. They tapped out a familiar pattern, a rhythm she knew by heart. Even though she tried so hard to forget it, she did not realize what she was doing until Victor's voice cut through the silence. He asked her what song that was. Elena's fingers stopped immediately. She looked up confused and asked what he meant. Victor pointed a thin, wrinkled finger at her hand. He said she had been playing something. Her fingers were moving like she was pressing keys on an instrument. Elena felt heat rush to her cheeks. She pulled her hands into her lap and shook her head. She told him it was nothing, just a silly habit she had picked up somewhere. Victor did not respond right away. He just kept looking at her with those sharp, intelligent eyes. Then he said something that knocked the breath out of her chest. He told her to stop lying. Elena's mouth went dry. She asked what he was talking about. Victor shifted in his bed and reached for something on his nightstand. It was a folder, a thick folder stuffed with papers. He opened it and began reading out loud. He read her full name. He read her date of birth. He read the name of the high school she attended. He read about the scholarship she won at 17 years old. He read about her admission to the National Conservatory of Music. Read about the competitions she entered and the awards she received. He read about the professors who called her a prodigy. He read about the bright future everyone predicted for her. Elena sat frozen in her chair. Every word hit her like a punch to the stomach. She had spent 6 years trying to bury that part of her life. She never talked about it. She never told anyone at the hospital. She had convinced herself it was ancient history. But here was this old man reading her secrets like they were printed in a newspaper. She demanded to know where he got that information. Victor closed the folder calmly. He said he was a wealthy man with connections everywhere. When someone new enters his home, he wants to know exactly who they are. Oh, he had his people dig into her background. They found everything: her academic records and her performance reviews, her competition scores and her teacher recommendations. They even found newspaper articles from years ago praising her talent. Elena felt sick. She stood up from her chair and her legs were shaking. She told him he had no right to invade her privacy like that. Victor showed no reaction to her anger. He simply asked why she gave it all up. Elena turned away from him. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She did not want to answer. She did not want to open that door. But the words came out anyway. She told him about her mother, how she got sick during Elena's second year at the conservatory, how the diagnosis was bad and the treatments were expensive, how Elena had to choose between chasing her dreams and saving her mother's life. It was not even a real choice. There was only one option she could live with. So she dropped out of school and became a nurse. She worked double shifts and triple shifts. She did whatever it took to pay for her mother's care. And somewhere along the way, she stopped thinking about music. She locked that part of herself in a box and threw away the key. Victor listened without interrupting. When Elena finished speaking, the room was quiet. Then the old man said something unexpected. He said her sacrifice was noble, but also foolish Elena spun around ready to defend herself, but Victor held up his hand to stop her. He told her that running from your true self never works, it only creates more pain sooner or later. The thing you are running from catches up with you. Elena had no answer for that. She just stood there, breathing hard. With her fists clenched at her sides, Victor let the silence stretch for a long moment. Then he raised his arm and pointed across the room. He pointed at the dusty white cloth covering the piano in the corner. He gave her an order. He told her to go over there and play. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her feet. She shook her head. Immediately, she said she had not touched a piano in 6 years. She said her skills were gone. She said she could not possibly perform for anyone. Victor's expression turned hard as stone. He told her this was not a request. She would sit at that piano and she would play. If she refused, he would end her contract tonight. She would be out of this house by morning, and without this job, how would she pay for her mother's Carolina's heart pounded so loud she could hear it in her ears. This old man was cruel. He was using her desperation against her. He knew exactly how much power he had over her, and he was not afraid to use it. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to tell him he was heartless and manipulative, but she could not afford to lose this job. Her mother needed the medications. Her mother needed the treatment facility. Her mother needed her daughter to keep fighting. So Elena swallowed her anger and walked toward the corner of the room. Each step felt like walking through wet concrete. Her legs did not want to carry her forward. Her whole body was rebelling against what she was about to do. She reached the piano and grabbed the dusty white cloth. She pulled it away and let it fall to the floor. The instrument underneath was gorgeous black lacquered wood, polished to a mirror shine, ivory, keys that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. It was a Steinway grand piano worth more than Elena would earn in 10 lifetimes. Ran her trembling fingers along the edge of the keyboard. Memories came flooding back without permission. She remembered sitting at a similar piano when she was just a little girl. She remembered her first teacher telling her she had magic in her hands. She remembered practicing for hours until her fingers ached. She remembered the thrill of performing in front of an audience. She remembered the applause and the flowers and the feeling of being truly alive. Then she remembered walking away from all of it. She remembered the last time she played before today. It was in her tiny apartment the night before she dropped out of school. She played through tears, knowing it might be the final time, and then she closed the lid and never opened it again until Elena sat down on the bench and positioned her hands over the keys. They were shaking so badly she wondered if she could even hit the right notes. She closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. Behind her, Victor waited in silence. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. Elena thought about what piece to play. There was only one that felt right. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Same piece she performed at her last competition. The same piece that earned her a standing ovation. The same piece that represented everything she once was. She pressed down on the first key, and a single note filled the room. It hung in the air like a ghost returning home. Then she pressed another key and another. Her fingers stumbled at first. They felt clumsy and unfamiliar on the key. 6 years of silence had taken their toll. But slowly something miraculous happened. Her muscle memory started waking up. Her hands began to remember what her mind had tried to forget. The music flowed out of her rough and imperfect, but real. She played through mistakes and kept going. She played through tears that blurred her vision. She played through 6 years of grief and loss and sacrifice. Everything she had bottled up inside came pouring out through her fingers. Melody filled the enormous room. It bounced off the high ceilings and wrapped around the furniture. It reached into every corner and every shadow. For a few beautiful minutes, Elena forgot where she was. She forgot about Victor and the mansion and her troubles. She was just a girl who loved music, a girl who had finally come home. When the last note faded away, Elena sat motionless on the bench. Her shoulders were shaking with silent sobs. She was terrified to turn around and face Victor. She expected criticism or mockery or cold dismissal instead. She heard a sound that made her freeze. It was the sound of someone crying. She turned slowly and looked at the old man in the bed. Victor's face was wet with tears. His hands were gripping the sheets so tight his knuckles had turned white. His whole body was trembling like a leaf in the wind. He looked at Elena with eyes full of something she had never seen before, pain and sorrow and regret all mixed together. He spoke in a broken whisper. He said his daughter used to play that exact piece. It was Sophia's favorite nocturnes. He played it the night before she died, 5 years ago. Victor heard those same notes floating through this house. The next morning his daughter was gone forever, and he had not allowed anyone to touch this piano since then, until today, until Elena. The old man covered his face with his hands and wept. Elena sat at the piano, watching him cry. She understood now why he had been so cold. She understood the walls he had built around himself. They were made of grief and guilt, just like hers. Two broken people in a beautiful empty house, connected by music and loss and the ghosts of the people they used to be. Neither of them knew what would happen next, but something had changed between them forever, and there was no going back. Now the room stayed silent for what felt like hours. After the music stopped, Elena remained seated at the piano bench, afraid to move. Victor remained in his bed, with tears still wet on his wrinkled cheeks. Neither of them knew what to say. Words felt too small for what had just happened. Finally, Victor wiped his face with the back of his hand, took a shaky breath, and began to speak. His voice was different, now softer and more human than Elena had ever heard. I've told her about Sophia, not just the facts she already knew, but the real story. The story of a father and daughter who loved each other, but could never understand one another. Sophia was his only child. Her mother died giving birth to her, so Victor raised her alone. He poured everything into that girl. He gave her the best education money could buy. He took her to business meetings when she was barely tall enough to see over the table. He groomed her to take over his empire one day, but Sophia had other dreams. From the moment she touched a piano at age 5, she was obsessed with music. She would practice for hours without anyone telling her to. She would stay up late listening to recordings of famous pianists. She would talk about concert halls and symphonies and composers like they were old friends. Victor never understood that passion to him. Music was a nice hobby, but not a serious career. He told Sophia she could play piano as much as she wanted, as long as she also prepared to run the family business. For years, they compromised. Sophia studied business at university during the day. At night, she practiced piano until her fingers were sore. She was trying to live 2 lives at once to make her father happy, but it was tearing her apart inside. The night before she died, everything exploded. Sophia came to Victor and told him she had made a decision. She was going to leave the company and pursue music full-time. She had been accepted into a prestigious program in Vienna. She was going to move across the ocean and chase her dream. Victor lost his temper completely, said terrible things to her that night. He called her selfish and ungrateful. He said she was throwing away everything he had built for her. He told her that music was a waste of her potential. He said if she walked out that door, she should never come back. Sophia cried and begged him to understand. She told him music was not just something she wanted to do. It was who she was. Without it, she felt like she was slowly dying inside. But Victor refused to listen. He was too proud and too stubborn. He could not accept that his daughter wanted a different life than the one he had planned. Sophia ran out of the house. That night, she got in her car and drove away in tears. An hour later, she crashed into a truck on the highway. The police said she probably could not see through her tears. She died before the ambulance arrived. Victor stopped talking and stared at the ceiling. His hands were trembling against the bedsheets. Elena felt tears rolling down her own cheeks. She could not imagine carrying that kind of guilt, knowing that the last words you said to your child were cruel, knowing that you drove her away into the night that killed her. Victor continued in a voice barely above a whisper. He said he had not allowed anyone to touch that piano since Sophia died. He could not bear to hear music in this house. Every note reminded him of what he lost. Every melody brought back the memory of their final argument, so he covered the piano and let it collect dust. He pushed away everyone who tried to get close to him. He became cold and bitter and impossible to be around. 7 nurses quit because he made their lives miserable. He did not want anyone's help. He did not believe he deserved to be cared for. Was punishing himself for what happened to his daughter. But then Elena came along. Victor turned his head and looked directly at her. He said there was something different about her from the first day. He noticed the way her fingers moved without her knowing. He saw the ghost of music living inside her. When he researched her background and learned the truth, he felt something stir in his chest. Here was another person who had given up their dreams. Here was another soul carrying a heavy burden of sacrifice. He wanted to hear her play, not to torture her, but to feel something again. For 5 years he had been numb inside, frozen in grief and regret. But when Elena's fingers touched those keys, something cracked open. The music melted something that had been frozen for too long. He heard Sophia in those notes, not as a painful memory, but as a beautiful reminder that she once existed, that she once filled this house with joy, that she once sat at that same piano and made magic with her hands. Victor asked Elena if she would play for him, again as an order, this time as a request from one broken person to another. Elena did not know what to say. Part of her wanted to refuse playing. That piano had ripped open wounds she thought had healed, but another part of her felt something unexpected relief. For the first time in 6 years, she had let the music out. She had stopped pretending it did not matter to her. She had allowed herself to feel the thing she loved most in this world, and it did not destroy her. It actually made her feel more alive than she had felt in years. She nodded slowly and told Victor she would play for him, but only if he promised to stop being cool to her. She was not his enemy. She was not someone to be pushed around and threatened. They were going to do this. They would do it as equals. Victor almost smiled. It was the first time Elena had seen anything close to warmth on his face. He agreed to her terms. From that day forward, everything changed between them. Every evening after Elena finished her nursing duties, she would sit at the piano. She would play for an hour, sometimes longer. Victor would lie in bed and listen with his eyes closed. Sometimes he would cry silently. Sometimes he would just breathe deeply and peacefully. Sometimes he would tell stories about Sophia between songs. He told Elena about Sophia's first piano recital when she was 7 years old. He told her about the time Sophia played at a charity event and made everyone cry. He told her about Sunday mornings when Sophia would wake him up with music floating through the house. Each story was a tiny piece of his daughter coming back to life. Elena listened to every word. She began to feel like she knew Sophia, even though they had never met. In some strange way, she felt connected to this girl who shared her passion too. Women separated by time but united by music. As the weeks passed, Elena's playing improved dramatically. Fingers remembered their old strength and flexibility. The rust fell away and the brilliance underneath began to shine. She started playing pieces she had not attempted in years, difficult compositions that challenged her skills, and every time she conquered a new piece, she felt a surge of pride. Victor noticed her improvement and encouraged her to keep pushing. He said talent like hers was meant to be shared with the world. He said it would be a tragedy to let it fade away again. Elena brushed off his compliments, but secretly they meant everything to her. For so long she had felt invisible, just another tired nurse doing a thankless job. But Victor really saw her not as a servant or an employee, but as an artist. It was a gift she did not know she needed. Their evening sessions became the highlight of her days. She actually looked forward to walking over to that piano. She looked forward to losing herself in the music. She looked forward to the quiet conversations that followed. Victor started sharing more than just memories of Sophia. He talked about his own life and regrets, admitted that he had spent decades chasing money and power. He built an empire, but lost the people who mattered most. His wife died young, and he buried himself in work instead of grieving. Pushed Sophia into business, because he was afraid of being alone. He wanted her close to him always. Never realized that his grip was suffocating her. Elena shared her own stories too. She talked about growing up poor with a single mother who worked 3 jobs. She talked about discovering piano through a free program at her school. She talked about teachers who believed in her when no one else did. She talked about the dreams she used to have: concert halls and standing ovations and traveling the world. She talked about the night she made the decision to give it all up, how she cried for hours, but knew there was no other choice. Victor listened without judgment. He understood sacrifice in a way few people could. They were 2 wounded souls finding comfort in each other's company. Not romantic love, but something just as powerful: a deep human connection built on honesty and shared pain. The mansion that once felt cold and empty began to feel warmer. Music filled the hallways again after 5 years of silence. The staff noticed the change in Victor. He was less harsh and more patient. He even said please and thank you occasionally. The doctors noticed his health improving even faster. They said his mental state was directly affecting his physical recovery. Elena knew the truth. It was not medicine healing Victor, it was music. It was memory. It was the simple act of letting someone in after years of being alone. And she was healing too. Every note she played stitched together a piece of her broken heart. Every evening at that piano reminded her who she really was. She was not just a nurse paying bills. She was an artist who had lost her way. And somehow in this strange, unexpected place, she was finding her way back. Neither Elena nor Victor knew what the future held. But for now, this was enough: 2 people helping each other survive, 1 song at a time. 4 months had passed since Elena first walked through the gates of the Harrington mansion. In that time, everything had changed. Victor was no longer the angry, bitter man who scared away 7 nurses. His health had improved beyond what any doctor expected. He could walk with a cane. Now, instead of being confined to bed, his speech was clear and strong. His appetite had returned and color had come back to his cheeks. The medical team called it remarkable. They used words like miraculous and unprecedented. They said patients his age rarely recover this quickly from a severe stroke. They credited the excellent care he was receiving. But Elena knew the real reason behind his transformation. It was not medicine or physical therapy. It was purpose. Victor had something to live for again. Every evening he sat in his wheelchair by the window, waiting for Elena to play. His eyes would light up when she walked toward the piano. He would lean forward slightly as her fingers touched the keys. For those precious hours he was not a grieving father drowning in guilt. He was simply a man who loved music, a man reconnecting with the memory of his daughter. Through melody, Elena had transformed to her. Playing had reached levels she never achieved, even at the conservatory. Something had unlocked inside her. The fear and doubt that held her back for years had melted away. She played with freedom and passion and raw emotion. Victor told her she was better than ever. He said Sophia would have loved to hear her play. Those words meant more to Elena than any award or standing ovation. But lately she had noticed something strange. Victor was hiding something from her. She caught him making phone calls at odd hours. He would stop talking the moment she entered the room. He had visitors she was not introduced. Tom in expensive suits who arrived with briefcases and left looking satisfied. Papers were signed behind closed doors. Conversations happened in whispers. Elena tried not to let it bother her. Victor was a businessman. After all, he probably had 1,000 deals happening at any given moment. It was none of her concern, but curiosity gnawed at her. Why was he being so secretive? Why did he change the subject whenever she asked about his meetings? One afternoon, Elena was walking past Victor's study when she heard him on the phone. She did not mean to eavesdrop. She was just passing by on her way to get fresh linens. But then she heard her own name, and she froze. Victor was talking about her to someone. He mentioned the National Conservatory. He mentioned scholarships and programs and deadlines. He mentioned a European tour and performance opportunities. Elena felt her stomach drop. What was he planning? She wanted to burst in and demand answers, but something held her back. Instead, she retreated quietly and spent the rest of the day with a knot in her chest. That evening, she played piano as usual, but her mind was elsewhere. Victor noticed immediately. He asked if something was wrong. Elena shook her head and said she was just tired. Victor did not push her. He simply listened to her play and kept his thoughts to himself. 3 days later, everything became clear. Elena arrived at Victor's room for their morning routine and found him already dressed. He was wearing a proper suit instead of his usual comfortable clothes. His hair was neatly combed, and he looked almost nervous. He told Elena they were expecting a special guest today. She should put on something nice and meet them in the main sitting room at noon. Elena was confused, but did as he asked. She changed into the one decent dress she had brought with her. She fixed her hair and tried to calm her racing heart. At noon, she walked into the sitting room and stopped dead in her tracks. A woman was seated on one of the velvet chairs. She was elegant and composed, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect bunch, wore a tailored navy suit, and held herself with quiet authority. Elena recognized her immediately. This was Dr. Marguerite Chun, the dean of the National Conservatory, the same school Elena had been forced to leave 6 years ago. Elena's legs went weak beneath her. She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. Victor was sitting across from the dean with a satisfied look on his face. He gestured for Elena to come closer and take a seat. Elena moved like she was walking through a dream. Nothing felt real. She lowered herself into a chair and tried to make sense of what was happening. Dr. Chen smiled warmly and said it was wonderful to see Elena again. She said she remembered Elena from years ago. Such a talented student, such a tragic loss. When she had to withdraw, Elena could barely find her voice. She managed to ask what was going on. Victor leaned forward with his hands folded on his cane. He told her he had been working on something for the past 2 months, a project he kept secret because he knew she would try to stop him. Then he laid it all out piece by piece. Had contacted the National Conservatory and spoken with Dr. Chun personally. He explained Elena's situation and her extraordinary talent. He arranged for a private scholarship in Elena's name, full tuition and living expenses covered for as long as she needed. But that was not all. He had paid off every single one of her mother's medical debts, every hospital bill and treatment cost and medication expense gone wiped clean. Her mother had been transferred to the finest long-term care facility in the country, a place with beautiful gardens and around-the-clock nurses and specialists who actually cared. Elena would never have to worry about those bills again, and there was more. Dr. Chun had reserved a spot for Elena in their advanced program. Upon completion, she would be guaranteed a position in the European concert tour. She would perform in Vienna and Paris and London and Rome on the stages she had dreamed of as a young girl. All the opportunities she thought were lost forever. Elena sat in stunned silence as the words washed over her. She could not process what she was hearing. This had to be some kind of joke, some cruel trick. She looked at Victor and then at Dr. Chen. Their faces were completely serious. This was real. Everything Victor described was actually happening. Something inside Elena snapped. Instead of gratitude, she felt a wave of hot anger rise in her chest. She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. She looked at Victor with fire in her eyes. She asked him what gave him the right to do this. She did not ask for his charity. She did not want to be his project. She was not some broken thing he could fix to make himself feel better. Victor tried to speak, but Elena cut him off. She said she understood now. He felt guilty about what happened with Sophia. He destroyed his own daughter's dream, and now he was trying to make up for it through Elena, but she was not Sophia. She was not his second chance at being a good father. She would not be controlled and manipulated just because he had money and power. The room went silent. Dr. Chun looked uncomfortable and glanced at Victor. Elena was breathing hard with her fists clenched at her sides. Years of frustration and pride and fear came pouring out. She had built her identity around sacrifice. She was the good daughter who gave up everything. She was the strong woman who needed no one's help. Accepting this gift meant admitting she still wanted her dreams. It meant admitting she was not as selfless as she pretended to be, and that terrified her more than anything. Victor waited until she finished. Then he spoke in a calm, steady voice. He did not defend himself or make excuses. Simply told her the truth. He said, yes, he was doing this partly because of Sophia. He would carry the guilt of that night until the day he died. But this was not about replacing his daughter or controlling Elena's life. This was about something different. Asked her to sit down and listen, really listen. Elena hesitated, but something in his voice made her comply. She lowered herself back into the chair. Victor took a deep breath and continued. He said 5 years ago, he destroyed his daughter's dream because he was too proud to let her choose her own path. He thought he knew better. He thought his money and his plans were more important than her happiness, and because of that pride he lost her forever. He would give every penny he had to take back what he said that night, but he could not. The past was done. All he could do now was try to be different. When he met Elena, he saw someone else whose dream was dying, not because of pride, but because of circumstance. She did not give up music because she wanted to. She gave it up because life forced her hand, and that was a tragedy. He actually had the power to fix. He told Elena this was not charity, this was not manipulation, this was his redemption. Only way he knew how to honor Sophia's memory was to save another musician from losing their gift. He looked Elena straight in the eyes. He said she could refuse. She could walk away right now, and he would not stop her, but she would be making a mistake. Not for him, for herself. Talent like hers came along once in a generation. The world deserved to hear her play. Sophia deserved to have her dream live on through someone who could actually achieve it. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. All her anger had drained away. In its place was something raw and vulnerable. A hope she had been afraid to feel. A door she had been afraid to open. She looked at Dr. Chen, who nodded encouragingly. She looked at Victor, whose eyes were wet with tears of his own. She thought about her mother, safe and cared for in that beautiful facility. She thought about the piano waiting for her at the conservatory. She thought about stages in Europe filled with people who wanted to hear her play. She thought about the little girl who fell in love with music all those years ago. That girl was still inside her, buried, but not gone, waiting for permission to dream again. Elena opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She just sat there crying in that elegant room, surrounded by possibility, surrounded by fear, surrounded by the terrifying, beautiful chance to reclaim everything she had lost. Elena did not sleep that night. Lay in her small room at the end of the hallway, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced through everything that had happened. The dean sitting in that elegant room, Victor revealing his secret plan, all those debts erased like they never existed, her mother safe in a beautiful facility, a scholarship waiting for her at the conservatory, a spot on the European tour. It was too much to process. Part of her still wanted to refuse. She had spent 6 years telling herself she was fine without music. She had convinced herself that nursing was her true calling. She had built walls so high she forgot there was a world beyond them. But another part of her was screaming. This was her chance, maybe her only chance. How many people get an opportunity like this? How many people have their stolen dreams handed back to them? She thought about what Victor said about running from your true self. He was right, and she knew it. She had been running for 6 years, running from the pain of giving up music, running from the fear of wanting something she could not have, running from the girl she used to be. But you cannot run forever. Eventually, the thing you are avoiding catches up with you. It finds you in the way your fingers tap invisible keys. It finds you in the ache you feel when you hear a beautiful melody. It finds you in the emptiness that never quite goes away. Elena got out of bed before sunrise. She walked down the long hallway to Victor's room. The old man was already awake, sitting by the window, watching the sky turn pinky. did not seem surprised to see her. He simply gestured for her to sit in the chair beside him. Lena sat down and took a deep breath. She told him she had been thinking all night. She told him she was scared, more scared than she had ever been in her life. Going back to music meant admitting she never stopped wanting it. Meant facing 6 years of grief and loss. It meant becoming vulnerable in a way she had learned to avoid. Victor listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked her one simple question. He asked what Sophia would tell her to do. Elena closed her eyes and thought about the daughter she never met. The girl who loved music so much she was willing to lose everything for it. The girl who died with her dreams still unfulfilled. What would Sophia say if she were sitting here right now? The answer came to Elena immediately. Sophia would tell her to stop being afraid. Sophia would tell her that life is too short to hide from the things you love. Sophia would tell her to sit at that piano and never get up. Elena opened her eyes and looked at Victor. She told him she would do it. She would go back to the conservatory. She would chase the dream she abandoned. She would play on stages around the world. She would do it for herself and for her mother and for Sophia, and she would do it for Victor too. The old man smiled. It was the first real smile Elena had ever seen on his face. His eyes crinkled at the corners, and years seemed to fall away. He looked almost young in that moment, almost happy. He reached out and took her hand in his. His grip was weak but warm. He told her she had given him something priceless. She had brought music back into his home. She had helped him remember the good times with his daughter. She had shown him that redemption was possible, even for a foolish old man. Elena squeezed his hand and felt tears rolling down her cheeks. These were not tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude and hope and love. 2 months later, Elena stood outside the gates of the National Conservatory. Her heart was pounding so hard, she thought everyone could hear it. Students walked past her carrying instrument cases and sheet music. They looked so young and confident. Elena felt like an imposter among them. She was 29 years old. Most of her classmates would be a decade younger. She had been away from formal training for 6 years. What if she could not keep up? What if she had forgotten too much? What if this was all a huge mistake? Then she remembered Victor's words. Talent like hers does not disappear. It hides, it waits, but it never truly dies. She straightened her shoulders and walked through those gates. The first year was harder than anything Elena had ever experienced. She practiced 8 hours a day, sometimes more. Her fingers ached and her back hurt and her eyes burned from reading music. She was behind her classmates in technique and theory. She had to work twice as hard just to catch up. But she did not give up every time she wanted to quit. She thought about Victor. She thought about Sophia. She thought about all the sacrifices that brought her to this moment, and she kept playing. Slowly, she began to improve. Her professors noticed her dedication and praised her progress. Her classmates stopped seeing her as an outsider. She made friends who shared her passion. She discovered new composers and new styles. She fell in love with music all over again. Victor called her every week to check on her progress. His voice grew weaker as the months passed. His health was declining despite the best medical care, but he never missed a call. He asked about her classes and her performances. He wanted to know every detail. He lived through her achievements like they were his own. At the end of her second year, Elena received incredible news. She had been selected to perform at Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert venue in the world. Every pianist dreamed of playing on that stage, and Elena had earned her spot. She called Victor immediately to share the news. His voice was barely a whisper. Now the doctor said he did not have much time left. When Elena told him about Carnegie Hall, he laughed with pure joy. He said he would be there. No matter what it took, he would be sitting in that audience. Elena begged him not to push himself. She said his health was more important than any concert. Victor refused to listen. He said he had spent 5 years waiting to hear his daughter play on a great stage. Missed that chance and he would never forgive himself. He would not miss this one. Elena was too moved to argue. She just told him she loved him. Words came out naturally. She had never said them before, but they were true. She loved this stubborn, impossible old man who changed her life. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then, he said he loved her too, like the daughter he almost destroyed, like the second chance he never deserved. The night of the concert, Elena stood backstage trembling. The auditorium was packed with thousands of people, critics and musicians and music lovers. From around the world, they had all come to hear her play. She peeked through the curtain and scanned the front rows. There in the center was Victor. He sat in a wheelchair, wrapped in blankets, looking frail and thin, but his eyes were bright and alert. He was smiling. Elena felt strength flow through her body. She walked onto that stage and sat at the grand piano. The lights were blinding and the silence was absolute. She placed her fingers on the keys and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. She played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece she performed in Victor's mansion all those months ago. The same piece Sophia played the night before she died, but this time Elena played it differently. She played it with everything she had, all her pain and sacrifice and loss, all her hope and gratitude and love. She played for her mother, who gave her strength. She played for Victor, who gave her wings. She played for Sophia, whose dream lived on through her fingers. When the final note faded, the hall was silent. For one terrifying moment, Elena thought she had failed. Then the applause began. It started slowly and built into a roar. People rose to their feet, cheering and crying. The sound washed over Elena like a wave. She stood and bowed with tears streaming down her face. She looked at Victor in the front row. He was crying too. He lifted one thin hand and pressed it to his heart. Elena pressed her hand to her own heart. Across that crowded hall, they shared a moment that belonged only to them. Victor passed away 3 months later. He went peacefully in his sleep with a small smile on his face. Elena was holding his hand when he took his final breath. She did not cry. She had already made peace with losing him. He had lived long enough to see her dream come true. That was the only ending he wanted. A week after the funeral, Elena received a letter from Victor's lawyers. He had left her something in his will. It was the piano, Sophia's piano, the one covered in dust that started this whole journey. Attached was a handwritten note in Victor's shaky script. The note contained just a few simple words. It said, "Play for both of us, Elena." Had the piano moved to her new apartment near the conservatory, every morning she uncovered it and sat on the bench. She played for herself and for her mother. She played for Victor and for Sophia. She played for every person who ever had to give up their dream. And she played for every person brave enough to take it back. Years passed, and Elena became one of the most celebrated pianists in the world. She performed in concert halls across Europe and Asia and America. She won awards and earned standing ovations. But she never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the scared nurse who walked into a mansion expecting nothing. She never forgot the angry old man who saw the music hiding inside her. She never forgot the daughter whose dream finally found its way into the light. And every time she sat at a piano, no matter how famous she became, she whispered the same words before. She played, "This is for you, Sophia. This is for you, Victor. This is for all of us who learned that it is never too late to dream again."